David Pilz. Some call me the Oracle, some call me Whitestar, Equisal, Salal to Spokes, technically Whitestar Eagle Visions. I earned these names traditionally. I'm a pipe carrier, a lodge keeper, I'm a prophecy teacher. Right now, as a species, we are going through this amazing revolution. And you're a part of it. You know, way back in 2012 when nothing happened, so much happened. But they forgot to tell you. They forgot to show you. I'm sure you recognize the whole world is in a real interesting place right now. And the prophecies are clear that the past is coming to an end, is being dismantled as gently as possible, but definitively being dismantled. And you, as a human, are becoming so much more than you used to be. New chakras, frequencies, new energies, new awareness, new science. You want to keep up? Come hang out with me once a week. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. Weird is the new sexy, they tell me. So come on, let's get weird together. METAPHYSICAL. See you soon. Let's get weird together. Awesome. Smudging my glasses so I can see with clarity, and my person so that I can receive and be in that good place. You know, walking a walk. Ooh, I'm going to close the window here. Hold on a second. Ambulances and fire trucks rushing by to save the world from impending doom. Oh boy, what a world life we live in these days, huh? You know, things are so wiggly. Things are so crazy. I know a lot of you have heard me talking about this time of transition in our life. And, you know, here we are living it. And what an exciting time, you know, to be here on the planet. What an exciting time to be walking in this way. You know, if I had to check in kind of what was the highlight of my week, and I have so many, you know, stories I could share, or, you know, clients' worlds and breakthroughs and, you know, value. And, you know, I guess maybe even a few borderline miracles if you know, kind of believe in that kind of thing. You know, so often, in my opinion, miracles are just an alignment of, you know, the right stuff, the right intention, the right tools, the right people, the right, you know, everything comes together in that way, you know, rather than necessarily buying into this, you know, celestial or, you know, monotheistic influence, if you like, right? You know, and in saying that, you know, as a person of, if you like, science, I also come from this place of deep sacredness and recognizing that there is an influence from the universe. There is, you know, there's something bigger than me. There's something wiser, smarter, more congruent, more connected. You know, what that is, you know, as you all know, I've been spending my lifetime trying to kind of maybe figure that out, what that is specifically. I have a relationship with it, but that relationship doesn't necessarily fit into any of the paradigms or religions that, you know, have showed up in my world that I've explored to explain what that is and what that isn't, you know. So, you know, I'll just keep on exploring. I'll just keep on asking questions, because that's kind of, if you like, whether it's metaphysical and paranormal science, you know, science kind of is, the whole point of it is to ask questions, right? If you don't challenge the science, then you're not really doing science, right? You know, and which leads me to kind of, interestingly enough, one of the best 4 hours I spent during this week. My poor wife, you know, a friend of mine, Alex, sent me the link to the newest Terrence Howard, you know, on Joe Rogan interview. And of course, you guys remember that I was a big fan of some of the breakthrough, you know, thoughts and you know, the daring of this mind, this powerful, brilliant mind, daring to ask questions that, to be perfectly honest, you know, it's verboten to ask these questions. You know, the problem is that it carried weight. There was a whole bunch of us who resonated with some of the truths he was presenting. Some of the, well, hey, wait a minute, hold on a second. There's actually something here. And there was enough of a powerful response there that he got a response from, if you like, the establishment, or as close as it gets. And that's this Eric Weinstein guy, and mathematician, and etc. You know, I got to tell you, I really appreciate the fact that Eric stood up in the first place. Yeah, you know, here's a guy who, to be honest, has a lot to risk, even just humoring, you know, some guy like Terrence Howard, right? You know, I can appreciate he felt safe and secure on the platform. Joe Rogan's got a good rep. And, but at the same time, some of the conversations that they had, some of the stuff that went down, didn't necessarily work out so well for the establishment, right? I, on top of the science, that got presented, for better or for worse, science is constantly and perpetually, in my opinion, evolving, changing, shifting. There's probably some real cool nuggets in what was shared on, both sides of those microphones, in a good, healthy way. But what also I walked away with was this dynamic, and more so than ever before, this reminder that there is this elitist paradigm that's playing out, within our scientific communities, right? Specifically since the mid 70s, right? There is this dynamic of, unless you spend your 30 years being trained by us in what and how to think, then what you got ain't crap. And yet, one of the things, for example, that, Terrence Howard brings to the table is this periodic table of elements. And plenty of you have heard me speak about the monoatomic dynamics, the monoatomic elements, which, to be honest, have been conveniently omitted. And we aren't even talking about it. There's ether, which is spelled AETHER. There's so many questions, and there's so even the box. And keeping in mind the periodical table of elements that got challenged is still an old version. There's a new one that showed up in the last 50 years. But are they still teaching the old stuff? And is science actually keeping up? Is science doing what it's supposed to, which is be science for the sake of science, to get as many different perspectives, to get as many different dynamics in place? But it's become this politicized. And yeah, we know that most scientists, kind of their work tends to lean towards whoever it is that's paying for the gig, because people want to continue to remain employed. We already know that, and we know of that. But it's certainly become that much more, not only just politicized, but almost weaponized. Certainly in the last 4 years, as we've seen, science has not necessarily been our that version of science hasn't necessarily been our friend. Whereas it seems to me that more and more it's, these brilliant minds who are cooking up stuff in their kitchen that are going to maybe come up with some answers for the next step, for the tomorrows, right? I honor the people like the Elons, I'm saying, who create and dive into and have this amazing thing like this car, for example, and say, you know what, instead of even patenting it, I'm going to throw it into the ring and say, keep up, challenge me so that I'm forced to even be better myself. To me, science has a sacredness involved in it too. Without a single socialistic perspective on it or ownership dynamic of it, I truly believe that it belongs to all of us. And, for those very few, who want to, flex and decide that they own the science or that they are the science, we've heard that one too, things get a little bit awkward for me. Things get a little bit, what do you mean by that? And my hackles go up, and I'm no longer happy about it. As you guys know, I'm educated myself. I got papers and letters behind my name and all of that stuff. And yes, they did teach us, while I was going through that process, that we have to hold ourselves to a higher measurement in community. We actually have to be seen and heard, and and show up in community as if you like a doctor, as a PhD. We have to show up in the communities and the world at large. I guess it boils down to protect the establishment. Don't make us look bad. That's the bottom line, right? You can make yourself the fool, and we'll just do our best to discard you and eliminate you, and maybe even pull your papers and your numbers and your letters and stuff. But it's just very interesting, for sure. What a wiggly world. And as you guys know, I've been involved in, media, not keeping my Fred Flintstone mouth shut for a long time. But at the same time, I got there because I have these instincts and I have these intuitions, and I have this thing going on inside my world that's very, I don't even want to say unique, because I'm a true believer that every single person on the planet has it going for them. but it's why people ask me to come in and play and be interviewed, and why people think that I might have something to offer. It's why you're listening right now. Maybe it's because I maybe have some insights that you hadn't seen, and to be honest, a lot of times I see them because I can see around corners, right? Today's guest, Everett Thelmer. I met this guy. Boy, I didn't even know what the first time was. You know what? We're gonna have him come on out and tell a story himself. But I totally respect this guy. He's full of questions, 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 questions. See, as far as I'm concerned, he's a scientist. If you don't mind, come on out, Everett. Yeah, welcome. Hey, everybody, meet Everett. Everett, meet everybody.
David, it is such an honor to be here. I mean, I've been on the other side of the microphone with you a few times,
Totally.
and
This is fun.
This is the hot seat.
Totally.
It's a little different.
I love that you're feeling that, seriously. And I hope the experience at the end of the day is valuable to you. I promise that I'm not going to, put you into any dynamic, but I was just, sharing with the audience here, like when we met, we were just sharing a story with some of our background producers and stuff like that when you first came on here. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing that story of how you and I bumped into each other.
You and I met through a paranormal investigator, Bill Hauser.
Oh, Bill! The spirit box guy.
Yeah, he had messaged me and said that he thought you and I would have a great conversation together, and I should invite you on the show.
Oh.
And I think over the course of a couple messages back and forth, I got you to agree to come on the show. And for those that don't necessarily know the behind the scenes stuff, you and I didn't really know each other, and we didn't really have much communication other than like a week before the show. We kind of outlined, figured out where we were maybe going to go. A few days before that, or a few days after that, a few days before the show, I probably messaged you or emailed you, said, "Are we still on?" You confirmed. Then the day of the show, a little bit beforehand, I let go. And that was the extent of our conversation. And immediately you kind of blew me away, because you and I started our conversation, and it was probably, I don't remember exactly what it was about, but it was probably about the nuts and bolts of UFOs or something at that time, because it was the beginning of the show. It was our first time talking. And and I love to tell this story to skeptics, and this is where it kind of gets it gets fun, because you and I are talking about something weird, and you kind of stopped the show. And if people go back and find the archives, this is in the show.
And please do. What do you know when that was? Or
gosh, you and I have been talking off and on for what now, about 3 years? So it would have been,
I think it might have been as far back as 2017 even. Like
it could have been. So it's way back in the archives. Yeah. But you stopped the show about 20 minutes into it, and you're like, "I just have to tell you, there's somebody standing behind you, and I think their name is Jim or James." And now at this time, it was a radio show, or it is a radio show.
Yeah.
We don't have cameras in the studio, because nobody wants to see me with my head down writing questions and doing all the things. I mean, I like to listen to the guest and kind of formulate where we're going to go.
Yeah.
So my head's down writing things unless I'm talking into the microphone. And so there's no camera. You and I hadn't spoken. And the big thing is, I had an uncle 2 or 3 days prior named Jim pass away. And it had not been on social media. The family had not said anything yet, his kids or his wife. So it wasn't my place to talk about it or mention it on social media. Certainly you and I didn't know each other well enough at that point in time where I would, even before the show, as we're warming up, say, "Oh yeah, the show's probably going to suck because, my uncle died and I'm sad," and all that. We just start the show. And like I said, 20 minutes into it, you're pulling this out of the air. And I love to tell skeptics this, because if they're friends of mine, they know me, and they know, like, if somebody tries to cold read me, you can tell, you pick it up. This wasn't any of that. I had not given you any clues or indication that anybody had even passed away. You just pulled it out of thin air, literally. And for somebody to do that and this is what I, talk with skeptics about. Either you have to be the cockiest of oracles, which we both know you're not, or you have to be pretty darn lucky.
Mm,
And I love the look on skeptics' faces. Not so much the ones that don't know me that well, but the ones that I consider friends,
yeah, yeah,
because either they have to dismiss you, they have to dismiss me, or they have to admit that there is something more that they're not seeing. And
totally,
generally they kind of reluctantly go, yeah, something happened there. And I love that.
totally, totally. Now, this is interesting. And I want to anchor in on this just a little bit as a teaching for our viewers. Of course, that we are Whitestar Teachings, and I teach people how to do this, how to actually flex those mental muscles, how to step into their fullest potential, whatever that might be, right? Whatever their superpowers are. And I got to tell you, there might be a few viewers who might be calling me out here because I have been outspoken about privacy. Yeah, I on purpose don't go in, to somebody. I learned this lesson as a kid, and many times ever since. There's no value in it for me, them, etc. Keep your secrets. It doesn't mean I can't go in, but I have over this lifetime learned that, to be honest, there's nothing really, and I mean this as no disrespect, there's nothing so interesting about any human being that I've ever met that I haven't encountered in any other human being that I've met, right? And so, I on purpose don't, and I actually believe that it's an infringement of personal privacy in a big way. I actually believe that it's offensive. There was this psychic Kim, for example. She was, all the rage for the longest time, and she would literally, watch people walk down the street and stop them in their tracks and start talking about these dead people hovering around them. And if you know how many times I've spoken badly about that, about poo poo poo, poor form, and so here I am in this situation where to a person who isn't a friend yet, barely an associate, right? And here I am, pulling this off in my own world. And so I guess on one hand, I want to share with the viewers that, what, sometimes it has to be done that way. And I can share that my experience in this way is that it never would have happened. I never would have especially stopped the show if Jim hadn't insisted that in some way, shape, or form, you were aware that his presence was there. Does it make sense, right? It was so
Oh,
important for him. Like he was being the circus act, if you like, doing everything he could to distract me. I couldn't continue the program unless I addressed him first. Kind of like a kid who was 5 years old with a drum kit, right? Kind of an idea, right?
I can totally see him doing that, and I can see other people having that same experience too. I mean, he and I had a very close, interesting bond, and I'm sure that there are other people out there who have lost people that that there's that bond where they have to get through, and you may be the voice, and maybe you have your, and I don't want this to sound the way it's going to sound, but maybe you
Yeah.
have your ethics, but they don't care about that. They have a message they want
I
you to get to that person.
I couldn't agree more. And to be perfectly honest, I teach that the spirit has a limited amount of energy in order to get that message shared. Right. It's like when you leave your body, you got like a quarter tank of gas, if you like, and that quarter tank's supposed to get you to heaven. And so if you're going to stick around and burn off that gas, visiting all these people and showing up and, talking to whoever may or may not be psychically endowed in their space, this is burning. This is at great risk. Does it make sense, right?
Oh yeah.
And so the urgency wasn't lost on me. Sometimes I can just, let it go, honest to goodness. But I can tell you, Jim was pretty loud. I wouldn't have stopped the show. I might have been a little bit more subtle even about it during a break or something, right? Kind of an idea. But I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it myself now,
Yeah,
just to see how I performed it. Totally.
I'm gonna have to go find that, because if I remember right, I want to say that I think I just kind of stumbled over my words a little bit and
Mhm.
was quite surprised, because again, we were talking I want to say it was probably the beginnings of the nuts and bolts of like UFOs or something like
I
that.
believe so. I believe, if I remember correctly, I was talking about, I had one of my UFO sightings at Ruskin Dam, one of the black triangles that are, now everybody knows about, right? For sure, as military stuff, right? For sure. But I did have a very and a witness. We filmed the whole event at Ruskin Dam. We had a UFO sighting. What was so cool about it, actually, and if you remember the story, we had people down in the States, up through Seattle and everything else, through our passing by us and even heading more towards the Northwest Territories, because there was this corridor that on a regular, like clockwork basis, that these UFOs were being sighted and spotted. And so we set ourselves up as a network to follow them all the way up. And it was so cool, actually, that this one radio station in Williams Lake picked up on it, which is a place, kind of in between Northwest Territories and me, picked it up, and they followed this whole thing up. They basically picked up where we left off, because I was one side of it. But what was so neat was we actually filmed not just in, normal digital, but we actually on purpose filmed that sighting in film, because you can't screw with film with CGI. It's obvious if you do. And not only did we record something, but we had that evidence sent into what's called white blasted. And when they white blasted, what it does is it pretty much makes it so that, now you can do it on your phone, almost, but it makes it brighter. And you can see things in a much more detailed manner. And you can tell if it's been CGI'd and stuff like that. And so it's interesting. You just reminded me of that. Yeah, totally. And you know what? This is one of the reasons, Everett, I mean, on all the interviews I've ever done over a lifetime, I can honestly say that you were one of the most personal interviewers. Right? You were just full of questions, without judgment, without any kind of reactionary dynamics involved, right? For sure, you're, as far as I'm concerned, a man of science. Again, just like I kind of mentioned in the preamble here, that science is about asking those questions. And the second, unfortunately, sometimes we get ourselves settled into that place of where the skeptics might be, of I've decided that this is right. It's equally as dangerous on the other side to be, kind of a flake, right? In the dynamic of I've decided that it's all weird, right? For sure. And so, I can appreciate my demographic is mostly weird, right? But
I think ours is too.
At the same time, you've already kind of even suggested that, and I know this of you too, you're a practical person, right? I'm saying, you know how to spot a gimmick a mile away. You've been around, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring you in is because I actually believe you've probably seen a lot more than maybe you're giving credence to, right? You're probably somewhere in your life, in your world, you have to have had formed some kind of a perspective, some kind of an ideology, right?
It's the truth is, it's kind of amazing, weird. I'm a skeptic because I have, and I've always tried on the show not to talk about these things because I don't want to influence people's ideas. If they appreciate the questions that I'm asking somebody, I want them to appreciate the question and appreciate the guest's answer, not have it influenced so much by my experiences, because I'm not the star of the show. Whoever's the guest is the star of the show. And my job isn't to batter them. It's maybe to push them a little bit. And you and I have had those exchanges where I'm going to ask you fair questions, but they might be tough.
Oh yeah.
But I'm not going to, try and attack anybody or anything like that. But we're going to have a discussion. And so I've always kind of kept my experiences out of it. But I've had insane of experiences, and it's even with me, it surprises me that I'm a skeptic. I mean, even look at the experience with you. I mean, in my world, that proves that there was something going on here, and it was literally. This is one of the side offices in my office. It was right here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you want to know about some of the specific experiences that I've had?
I would love to, and I guarantee everyone else would too. And and just as you're jumping into it, I also want to share that I'm probably the greatest skeptic in the room myself, right? Because I've seen a whole bunch of weird stuff to the point where it actually offends me when people start making stuff up, Does it make sense,
Okay.
right?
And this is where I have the questions, and I hijack your show on social media. Over the past like 5 6 years, there has been a I mean, you can see the pattern of somebody who's now psychic. I can appreciate somebody who's studied and learned their tools and learned their craft, and they've even suffered a little bit because being an empath or a psychic certainly can't be easy 24 hours a day. But you go into any paranormal group and you will start to see this person who has questions. And then they're beginning to feel they're getting the answers. And then they're studying this. And then they're giving mini readings for free. And then it goes to mini readings for $15. And within 3 4 6 months, they're doing an hour reading for $65. And the truth is, I have no faith in that. You don't learn you don't perfect your psychic abilities on social media over the course of 6 months.
I have met way too many people who suddenly bought a tarot deck and, all of a sudden they're a great oracle, right? And you're
Right.
not wrong. That's one of the reasons I got involved in the industry, is because I saw so much of that going down, right? And here's me, my whole life, this stuff, and again, in my arrogance, of course, you've heard my story. I went to the promoter and don't you care and all this stuff, and thinking that I was all that in a bag of chips, right? But ideally, to be perfectly honest, I started my industry in the industry because I wanted to show what the human was capable of to those people who were looking for that. There are psychic fairs we're talking hundreds, maybe even thousands of people showing up every weekend who are looking for something. Even if it's just, hey, I see Uncle Jim standing behind you, right? And that little nugget of faith, that little nugget of something that can keep them going. And yet I'm seeing way too often, pop psychologists or housewives with tarot cards who have no skills invested in, in any other way. And, suddenly they're making their way of it. And I know that sounds completely judgmental, but I've been in the industry long enough to earn that lens, because that is so prolific in the industry. Absolutely, totally.
Yeah, it's disappointing too. And I think it gives genuine psychics and people with genuine abilities are really it's disappointing. I don't want to say it gives them a bad name, because they do eventually get sorted out, I think. But
Correct.
it's sad to see it happen. And the sad thing is, you can sit in some of these groups and almost pick out the person who, in 6 months is going to be quote unquote psychic now.
Yeah.
It's disappointing. So you want to hear a couple of the
Love to.
strange and my very first paranormal experience was actually right outside that window. Now, I was fortunate enough to buy my uncle's house. My parents bought my grandparents' house, so the property has about 60 years of history in it.
Oh.
And when I was just a little kid, we were outside here. There's a bunch of trees, and my dad and I were walking out in the trees to go check a fire. We had been burning some brush in the springtime, cleaning up and burning some brush. And as we're walking out, this figure steps out from behind a tree, and it's lit up. I mean, it's kind of glowing. And I'm like 6 7 years old. I probably screamed and maybe even peed my pants. And my dad did not react at all to it. And in fact, he got a little bit upset. And, what are you doing screaming in the middle of the night, in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night? And like, I told him what I saw, and he kind of dismissed it. I thought, you know what? Maybe it was him and my grandfather playing a little trick on me. Turned out not to be that. But we discovered about a week later that just on the other side of the tree that he popped out of, this figure popped out of, there was a truck with a gentleman in it it was ruled suicide, but it quite possibly could have been murder. It was a shotgun with him sitting in the driver's seat. They ruled it suicide because that's what they did back then in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
And he had been out there for about 3 months before he was discovered. And it was about 2 weeks after I had that encounter
Now,
that
did you have the opportunity to ever see a clipping, a picture, an image? Because this is where the investigator in me kicks in, right? So, yeah, for sure.
no, there was no photo. I did have the name for a while. Because I had researched it, especially once the internet became a thing and it was easier to research.
Yeah.
But actually, every now and then, I do go and like search the old newspapers online. Unfortunately, the print newspaper that used to be here is long gone,
Hmm.
and I can't find the article or any news about it anymore. Up until probably about 10 years ago, I could. But
Interesting.
where I live is a very old boys network kind
Well,
of.
and that actually leads me to my next question. Okay, so here you are, this young boy, 7 years old, we'll say. You have this experience, you see this thing, you're definitely agitated and or responding to something. Dad poo poos all over it, but here you are talking about it, right? So some part of you couldn't let that go, obviously, right?
Oh,
And
I've
it's
I've held on to that since, well, for almost 40 years now.
totally so.
45 years.
So in each of us, every single person I've ever met on the planet, they have that moment. And it could be at 7, it could be at 3 years old, it could be at, I'm saying, even older. Sometime before we reach our puberty, we get either encouraged, in some way, shape, or form to step forward and even pursue this even deeper and ask those questions. And that was my experience too, right? But so many people, to be honest, allow that subjugation, that I don't even know if it's an oppression, but certainly somebody in your world that you trust and authority, poo-pooing all over your experience shuts it down, right? And then as we become adults, we tend to leave that behind, right? For sure.
I think he did for a while, but then I think he came around a little bit when my parents bought my grandparents' house from the estate.
Uh,
Because living in the house, it was not uncommon to, if you were in the basement, hear the front door upstairs open and you would hear somebody walking on the tile, but there would not be anybody there.
uh,
Both my grandfather and my dad were avid coin collectors. My dad would periodically find not a gigantically valuable coin, but he would find a rare coin or something that he would be interested in just in a random place on the shelf in a closet or in a drawer in a vanity kind of thing, where he'd been going in that closet or in that vanity for 10 years and it was never there. And all of a sudden, there it would be. And I think eventually he kind of came around a little bit.
mhm. Interesting.
But, I mean, he didn't like to, he's an old Vietnam, well, he was an old Vietnam vet. He's, silent and stoic, and he's not going to say too much about it.
Yeah.
There's one experience, well, there was a ton of, but one I'd like to share with you and actually get your opinion on it. But I
Sure.
have to be a little bit careful with the way I phrase this. Um, I had a friend who we were very close, and eventually we kind of drifted apart. And I had lost touch with her, hadn't really thought about her in you know, gosh, probably like 8, 10 years. And one night, I was sitting in my bedroom, and I was kind of not intentionally, but I was like drifting off into this like unconsciousness where I remember actually thinking, okay, if this is death, this is okay. I can live with this. And then this girl who I hadn't really even thought of in probably close to 10 years kind of pops into my head and says it's okay, and kind of hints that I should just go search her out, go find her. Well, when I did that, I found out that she had died 8 years before. She had, the day she died, she had actually called me earlier in the day, and I just kind of blew it off. And, we were in that process of sort of losing touch anyway. I forgot to call her back for 8 years. So
Interesting.
it feels like she came back from the dead to kind of poke at me and remind me. But that stage that I was in, where, like I said, it's sort of like an unconscious consciousness, and Can you explain that at all, or have
Well,
you experienced that?
well, to be honest, okay, like metaphysically speaking, we go through all sorts of different stages in our mental brainwaves and our, our altered states, if you like, right? Throughout the night, there's these 90-minute cycles that take place. But and I'm sure, and I'm going to assume that what a REM sleep, half awake, half asleep dream state is like, and you're doing your best to attempt to describe something that was different than that, right? And
Yeah,
so
this honestly, this would have been at like 8, 9 o'clock at night. I was sitting on the bed. There was no intent of going to sleep. It was almost like I
yeah,
was pulled into this sort of consciousness.
it's interesting. You see, I mean, we've heard terms like astral traveling, ethereal traveling as well. Um, you see, there's a bunch of variables here that I'm calculating in my brain. Bottom line, right? You see, I, I, were you in a place in your world, and this may be a tough question. I mean, were you in a place in your world where, to be honest, death might have been an option? Like, was there
No,
depression? Was
no,
there?
no. This was
Okay.
like I said, it was probably 8, 9 o'clock at night, and I wasn't depressed or anything. There was nothing tragic going on or anything like that. I simply sat on the bed and kind of drifted into this little world. And the part that I find most curious is that this woman, wasn't even in my radar or on my radar, in my thoughts, had kind of
8 years later.
pushed away. And to just come out of the blue and then to find out that she had passed away,
Yeah.
it was, if it was anybody else that came to me and then I found out later that she had passed away, I wouldn't put the two together. But it's not like I had dreamt about her or thought about her or anything like that in years, to all of a sudden come out
Totally.
or,
And one of the
appear.
evidence, and one of the pieces of evidence you presented was the fact that she had also tried to contact you that day, earlier that day before her demise,
Yeah.
right? Now it's interesting because when we do pass away, there is a possibility, and it's not as uncommon as you might think, there is a possibility of getting confused. There's a possibility of, if you like, getting temporary, if you want, lost, right? Even the dynamics of stuck, right? For sure. Um,
But wait, I want to interrupt just for 1 second,
yeah,
because I know
yeah.
that there are the skeptics out there that are going to go, oh, well, how do you know? How do you remember after 8, 10 years that it was that? And I will tell you this: there was a tragedy going on at the time that she called with a friend of mine, and that is exactly why I remember. I mean, I can remember looking at the phone going, I'll deal with this later. That's why I remember it. And I just want to put that out there for the skeptics who go, yeah, you can't remember something 8 years ago that it was the exact day. Well, I remember that day. It's burned into my head.
Well, sure. I mean, there's a part of you that anchored into it because you put it to the side and then she's no longer there. There had to be some kind of a
Right.
little tiny bit of a, oh my, right? In your own world, could I, should I have, yada, all these dynamics at play that, are very human, right? For sure. So I can't prove anything of this, but my perspective, to be honest, from the evidence that I've been gifted here, is that there was definitely a moment there where either one, she couldn't move on without having that encounter with you, or maybe you couldn't move on without having that encounter with her. Right? There's this stuff we bury. There's this stuff that we hide. Maybe that was a yoke that she showed up 8 years later to remove from you for your value. Does it make sense? And
Yeah.
either way, I'm convinced there was, because of the altered state that you tried to describe, without the wording and all of that stuff to associate with it. Again, you knew you weren't in that half awake, half asleep. There was definitely something unique going on here, and this encounter took place between the two of us. If you don't remember every word or every potential exchange that took place between the two of you, I dare say you could probably work with some just some even self-hypnosis, some affirmations, stuff like that, to actually be able to access that information that may actually be, in other words, I'm convinced there may be more information buried in you. But that was a moment of release for both of you, right? Keeping in mind in the afterlife, 8 years is nothing. 800 years is nothing. Time relationship doesn't have the same, experience at all. And so she could have stuck around for thousands of years without recognizing thousands of years had passed. And so for her, the 8 years was a non-issue, right? For you, that passage that time had passed. And again, because it had impact with you in that moment when it happened, the 8 years previous, that, if you want to use the word trauma, right, it got tucked away someplace, for sure. And in my opinion, there was a release, there was a letting go, and very likely from both of you, right? Because we can, as people, unfortunately, keep those people who pass on. We can keep them stuck here just a little bit by so badly not wanting to let them go, right? And those at home who've lost people, who are in your mourning and what have you, I don't want you necessarily feeling bad or guilty about that either, because again, on the other side, if it takes you 100 years to get over somebody, that 100 years is not being experienced by that other person, right? But it's necessary for us to recognize that we can have, especially if it's somebody we have hooks into, right, in some way, shape, or form, we can keep them here. And there might even, and I could go off into this oracleism stuff and say there was karma that the two of you hadn't manifested, but maybe somehow in your world you've been able to walk a certain path in a certain way where karma actually did happen. Whatever karma was between the two of you as people to meet in the first place, that got looked after on that day, if you like. And she was able to come in and say, "Oh, thank you so much, for doing that, even though I wasn't standing next to you when it happened," right? Kind of an idea. Lots of what ifs, right? I mean,
that's the nature of the paranormal, though, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
we won't know what the true purpose was, what the meaning was. Probably, I will probably find out when it's time for me to move on. But until then, and you had mentioned kind of maybe exploring it with self-hypnosis or something like that. And I get leery of that because I don't want to bring my own biases in. Like, I mean, I have thoughts. I mean, my big takeaway from that incident was it actually changed my view of death, because I was in this state, and I don't exactly know how long I was in the state, just maybe 10 minutes, but it changed my view of death. That her is almost a side, sort of a side note. And I don't mean to diminish her like that, but the big takeaway for me was how it affected my view of death. But I don't want to, bring those biases of her and my past into anything I were to try and discover through self-hypnosis. So I'm kind of just leaving it as, it's another one of those little pieces that kind of says, hey, you need to look beyond what you're looking at and understand that there's so much more going on in the world.
Totally. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. Death Horse. Okay. Come to the process. Interesting. That's interesting. One of our viewers says they just heard Wilma's voice come through the podcast.
That's I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm totally distracted. And this cough thing here, this communication, my throat chakra is triggered as well, to be honest, by the talking of this, and we'd actually be inviting her. I'm going to watch through, of course, this track afterwards and see what I can pick up as well, right? Fascinating.
But yeah, it was definitely, a little bit of again, every little piece of information I take in, I try and sort of process, and it affects how I view things. I mean, I admit I'm a skeptic. That doesn't mean I don't believe. That doesn't mean you have to show me the proof. It just means I don't understand everything, and I want to.
Totally. And that is by virtue, if you like, what I would consider a scientist, right? That open-mindedness, that that ability to have these experiences and even your resistance to do self-hypnosis, because of course we all have bias. You know, the cool thing about self-hypnosis and working with some of these things is you can actually create the paradigm through it so that you are exclusively the observer, right? Without bias showing up, without, and I only suggest it because it's an opportunity for you to do something on your own without even having to go out and hire somebody else and maybe get their bias, right? So,
But
you know,
I can understand that, but my thought is that, obviously this was somebody who was a very good friend.
yes.
Even though we had drifted apart, I still, I miss her to this day.
Mm,
So if I do the self hypnosis and I start bringing those biases in, then all of a sudden, am I diluting my own view of the situation? Am I creating something in my head that isn't really the way it's supposed to be? Does that make sense?
totally. This is, to be honest, why I don't read for people who I'm close to, because I have instant bias. Even clients who've been coming to see me sometimes for 4 or 5 years, I'll get to a place of, you know what, come see me for energy work and all that stuff. But if you're looking for something specific like predictions and what have you, I know you too well. Right. So, earlier you talked about not wanting to be biased and you want to go in cold so that the information is presented to you, completely cold. And to be honest, I was taught that by the remote viewers as well. Go into a situation where you know nothing about it. Matter of fact, they're going to hand you these 8 numbers, and those 8 numbers you have no relationship in any way, shape, or form to, and you're supposed to hand them a stack of paperwork back that gives them a full description of what those 8 numbers are related to. Fascinating blind and double blind stuff, right? And it's my opinion that's how most reading should be. I do a far better reading for somebody who's, even yourself, if I was to sit down and do a reading for you, even though we haven't been chummy and hanging out every day, I still have a bias in who I think you are, right? Because we've had this opportunity. Whereas my clients, first time they come see me, I tell them, sit down, shut up, let me do the talking here. We never get this opportunity twice, right? Let me get everything that I think I know about you out. Let's record it, of course, because that's fun too, right? And at the end of the day, if there's any questions, by all means. And if you knew how many of my clients are just, oh my goodness, like I had this list of questions and you got them all, right? And plus and more. And whereas again, that same person, because so coming back even just a year later, it can be problematic because I have a bias. You know, even for my own self, I have a tough time reading the field, and if you like, from my own world. People ask me if I predict my life all the time, and the answer is I follow the chi, I follow the energy. Life has a flow to it, and the right answer is always going to be in the middle of that flow, even if it's not the logical answer.
Yeah.
Even if I'm looking at two glowing doors, for example, one of them's can have that chi on it and the other one won't. You know what I'm saying? And if the one says, don't go through here, you know what I'm saying, because it's got big red signs on it, but if it's glowing, I'm going through it anyway. And at 1,000% of the time, that's worked out for me invaluably. Whereas, again, that skeptic inside me and that practical, logical, person likes to plot and plan like everybody else, right? For sure. And
See, I would prefer to have somebody who doesn't know me
yeah,
read me.
yeah,
And that's not just for me, but for them. Because, like the first time we did it, well, you didn't read me, but the first time you came on the show and that happened, that that offers validity
right.
to both sides. Whereas now, if I asked you to read me or do something like that, you know enough about me where, okay, I wouldn't say that you would intentionally tell me something good is going to happen just to make me feel good,
Sure.
but we both have our biases in what you see and how I interpret it.
Right.
And we have that connection where things can be a little bit off. I would rather just have somebody who doesn't know me impress me.
Correct.
And that's not taking from you. In fact, I would love to have had you read me more in the beginning, having
Mhm.
had that happen. But I also think that there's value in it having happened on the show
Yeah.
live, where anybody can go back and see it, because maybe now my ability to be read by you is spoiled a little bit.
Mhm.
But maybe there's 1,000 people out there who have gone, you know what? That changes my view a little bit. Let's look at these people. Let's follow these people. Let's find somebody who's trustworthy and learn. And I think that's the important part.
I couldn't agree more, sir. And I agree with you. The end game is, yes, there was this influence of, one, it makes a good show. Two, you can then share that information with your skeptics and have them chew on that. Even if it doesn't change their mind, it's still a piece of evidence of some form, right? That's pretty telling. I can appreciate, for sure. And maybe that was the point, right? Again, maybe the you and I connecting in that moment at that time. I have no doubt that Uncle Jim wanted to get your attention and let you know that he was around, and that in of itself was a part of the process. But you and I doing it on air, the reason why it was on purpose stopped in that way, again, has ramifications, has impact in circles that I might never. In other words, I appreciate the fact that I might have an impact, a positive impact in somebody's life that I might not even know their name. Right. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do.
And that's a huge responsibility.
Totally. And so I'd best be walking authentic, totally. Right.
And that's, I have to comment on that, because of all of these psychics, empaths, however anybody wants to be labeled, because now everybody seems to kind of pick the label that they think they can sell the best. You are probably the most authentic that I've ever, and I think that shows through the show. How many times have you come on the show where we go, you know what, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about this, and 2 hours later we haven't hit any of those topics, but we've gone down 7 different little side roads.
Totally. Well, and that's what I appreciate about you as Everett, as an interviewer, is one, that you're allowing for that to happen, right? Allowing for the 4 winds, if you like, to blow us around. That you and I both know at 100% of the time that 2 hours or 3 hours comes to an end, and we're going, that wasn't enough time. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like we came this close to solving all the world's problems, and totally, right?
How many times have we said, oh, we got 5 minutes left, how about we talk about the things you were coming on to talk about?
No kidding. Yeah. Totally. Oh, yeah. In other words, just total respect, sir. A part of me being able to show up in that healthy way is based upon who you are, right? I've been in interviews where I just get locked right up, right? It happens, for sure. And that has a lot to do with who's in the room, right? Us empaths, you talk about that. Us empaths don't respond well to, how can I put this, to conscious scrutiny that way. In other words, if you know how many times I've pulled stuff out of the air, like we're talking about here, just casually, but the minute someone says, okay, now do it on demand now, everything freezes, everything, what I'm saying? Don't kid yourself. There's been times I've been able to pull that rabbit out of the hat and do stuff like this, right? But it's more often than not, when I challenge me, if you like, I don't know if it's stage fright or if it's, the influence of that person in my face or, what have you, but it does happen where you can, as an interviewer or a person, I'm saying, approaching someone, who's empathic, psychic, insert label here, you can have an influence on the outcome of how it goes.
But right? how much of that has to do with, so many of these radio and podcast hosts kind of consider themselves the star of the show, and sure. And you're coming on the show, sure, on the face of it is to talk about your work, but really you're there to make them feel important or look good or be the star of their show. How much of it is that? Because
you're not wrong, because the power of edification only works if it's handed away, right? Like even a few moments ago you handed to me this amazing edification I know is authentic and real and comes from that good heart space of, man, you're rare, you know what I'm saying, what you're bringing to the table is unique. And my first response, of course, and it's interesting because I had an Anishinaabe elder teach this to me, actually, Gani. He's passed away since, but Gani, if you're hearing me, these teachings are still relevant in my world today. That edification only works if you hand it away to somebody else. if somebody comes into my life and says, David, you're amazing. Oh my goodness, you know, blah, 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 the bowing and all that stuff. In the past, I used to talk people out of it. I used to, convince them that I'm not that person that they see. I poop my pants, right? I'm saying I'm not who you think I am, right? And he caught me, playing small that way. And he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "You're stealing the medicine that person gave to you to give to them." Right? Because I'm supposed to, whether I like it or not, whether my ego is at stake or not, I'm supposed to thank you so much and own, not personally, but at least receive that, because that person thinks that I'm somebody, right? Then when I'm somebody, I can turn around to that person and say, "You're pretty freaking awesome too." And then it actually means something. If I manage to talk them out of the edification they've handed to me, the medicine that they've handed to me, yeah, I poop my pants, and I'm the guy who poops his pants, and I say you're cool. Who cares, right? Totally, right? And so it is an interesting dance, isn't it? Right, the ego, right? For sure. If it wasn't for the fact that I got angry at the industry, if it wasn't for the fact that I got angry that there were so many schmucks out there hurting people with bad advice and cons and all this stuff, I wouldn't have stepped up. I would have been perfectly happy to just continue my life doing my thing, but I got angry and I waved my pious finger, and all that showed up too, right? And next thing you know, here I am in the industry and loving every second of it. But
And you've done so much.
oh,
I mean, you haven't even been on the show yet to talk about some of the things, the TV and film you've produced.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And it's just getting started. Exactly. We've done so much stuff, from the ufology, the parapsychology, cryptozoology. I got to tell you, I've been a kid in a candy store this lifetime, and I like yourself. I love to explore the mysteries. I have to ask the questions, even if I don't like the answers. I got to ask the questions, right? For sure. And it has fearlessly led me into some really interesting corners.
You know, and does the universe owe us the answers, or is it the pursuit that is the goal, journey, value of it?
Which is why I choose not to predict my own life, right? I don't want to know what the end game is. I don't want to know what the answer is. I want to enjoy the pursuit of that answer. I want to enjoy the journey of that dynamic, exactly, just like you, right? For sure. I want to be completely okay with being completely wrong about a whole bunch of stuff.
And what happens if the aliens finally do come and land on the White House lawn? What's the next question? Where do we go from there?
No kidding.
Does life become boring?
Well, we certainly can't take them to our leader, can we?
Can't do that.
No. And actually, as you know, I mean, on your show, I've talked about the prophecies and how actually this is the year where things get, well, basically the Draconian Empire gets dismantled. And it's been going on for, as you can see clearly now, the last 2-3 years, right? Technically since 212. Well, I got to tell you, the prophecies talk about 227 is when we're actually going to get that UFO, little green men, White House front lawn, all of that stuff, right? So we're actually getting quite close to that according to these prophecies. And I might be a good psychic, but I ain't nothing compared to, these were things that were discussed. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago, per se, kept alive through, word, song, etc. And they are bang on accurate, like crazy, right? That stuff really impresses me. That stuff takes me to a level of inspiration of, if when I'm passed away, a few generations can look at the work that I did and say, yeah, there's value in that too, right? I can appreciate that. Like you say, I've had a big comic book journey this lifetime, but I really am in it for the species. I really am. I know that may sound weird for some people, but
and you know what though? I think that shows through, and I think that's why. I mean, I don't know how many times we've had you on the show at this point.
I don't even know. Yeah, let's do it again. So, yeah.
I know we still haven't talked about a couple of things that we keep saying we're going to talk about. But that's the other amazing thing, though. How many times have you come on the show and something like the day before happens where we've had to go, we need to talk about this.
Totally.
It's just kind of, it's amazing to just watch that happen and see how I want to say it's been what, 5, 6 times
Sure.
at
Yeah,
least.
at least. Yeah. Yeah.
And there were 3 times where I know we said the next time we're going to have you on, we're going to talk about the work you did in Florida. And then it didn't happen.
It didn't happen again. Yeah, totally. Right. So many other priorities, right? For sure. And again, I don't mind that too, being in the moment, just like today. Like I really, at the beginning, of the show, like, so we're going to talk about now. I just want to introduce you to my friends. I just want to
See,
introduce you to my people, right?
I love the fact that we didn't get to those topics those times. We found other things to talk about, and a lot of that, it kind of goes back to when I asked you about the hosts and they want to be the star.
Yeah.
And a big part of it is listening to the guest and going, okay, we can pick up on this, we can pick up on this, and we can go, and you and I have done it, and you and I and Kim have done it, where we go down some insane trails that we didn't even plan on going down because somebody said something a certain way, and pretty soon we're having a discussion that we never intended on having, but it's always fantastic, and it's always educational, at least for me.
Me too. I never walk away. I never walk away because we chew on stuff, right? And at the end of the day, again, you've got a keen mind. You just do. And the questions you're asking and the nuances and all of that stuff that you're bringing to the table is, by asking more questions, brings a new lens. Like I said, for sure.
And I love the fact that you and we can admit that we haven't agreed on everything.
Perfect.
We don't agree, but we can sit there and talk about it. And we can sit there and look at the different sides, your side, my side, or your perspective, my perspective, anybody else's perspective. We can sit there and all kind of come away with a little bit of enlightenment. Seeing something from somebody else's point of view is incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, one of two things is going to happen. Either one, if I have a disagreement with somebody or they have a different perspective, when we come together and share, either I'm going to walk away with feeling even more valid about my own perspective. No, that's just bunk. Right? It doesn't hold water, yada, 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 where I've done that experiment and it didn't work, or, all this. Or I come away with a more accurate perspective of what I think I know, right? It's a win either way, as long as you're right. There's none of that ego and that BS that interferes with that exchange, right? And
everybody takes a little bit away from the discussion, and it fits into their view, their perspective, and it makes everybody better, more intelligent, stronger. And I love the fact that we can have those discussions. I mean, I've interviewed people where, you try and just ask a simple question that differs with their view a little bit, and they're hanging up the phone because they don't want to have that conversation. They don't, and it's not even about challenging their beliefs. It's about explaining their perspective.
Yeah.
You can tell me your perspective, but unless you kind of explain it and let me experience it, I don't know what your perspective is.
I completely agree.
And I love that we can have those kinds of discussions.
I agree. And unfortunately, speaking of discussions, we've hit the top of the hour. They only give me an hour to play here, and so
I know the feeling.
We're gonna do this again, brother. Honest to goodness, I know that temporarily you're on sabbatical with your program, Extension 13. What's next on your horizon?
Right now, I don't know. I think I told you my mom developed dementia rather quickly. And, we're kind of in that flux stage of trying to figure things out. I don't want to put her in a home. I think that's a terribly disgraceful way to end your life. So, we're at that stage right now. Everything changes a little bit day by day. We're hoping in the next few weeks to kind of have something figured out and see where we go from there.
Awesome. All right, brother. Well, I know that you're welcome back here anytime. I'm going to bring you back a few more times. And of course, whenever you need me for your own programs, just give me a shout.
I so appreciate that. And I love getting the opportunity to be on this side of the microphone
No
this time.
doubt.
And I will be, your show, I've watched it, I follow you. I'm not the biggest commenter and social media and stuff, but I know what's going on. And I love the authentic work that you're doing.
I so
and I mean that. I would be telling you that if we weren't doing a show. And I think, I
Totally.
hope you know that.
I do know that. And actually, to be honest, when you do show up, lurking in the shadows or in the back of the room, I see you there. And the fact that you're paying attention, because you are a keen mind, because you do have that practical side to yourself, that I know for a fact if I came out with extreme bullshit, you'd call me on it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything to keep me any more honest, right? But I appreciate that, again, there are people like yourself out there paying attention to what it is I think I know. And totally.
I totally appreciate that. I think that's enough of us stroking each other's egos.
I think so.
But
guys.
Yeah, I will be on anytime you want. You just call or message.
Awesome. We'll definitely be in touch. And
thanks.
And the rest of you, I will see you next week.